Stage 1 tanks pressing for flight.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to SMAdvancedForum. Slightly unusual and unconventional start to the show this week or this month, but we've got some special guests, and that was a bit of a clue who we've got. Anyway, for those of you that don't know us, my name is Don Robinson. I am one of your regular hosts on SMAF. We are a talking shop, and we talk through the interesting topics of the day in and around the streaming industry. And today, one of our special guests has done one of the webcasts that I think we all crave to do. But I'm going to build the tension by not introducing our guests yet. I'm going to step away from that and introduce one of my co-hosts. Tim, are you out there?
Hey, Dom, I am. I have the world behind me, but as we'll see in a few minutes, we've actually got people with better backgrounds and more interesting stories. How are you recovering, Dom, from Content Delivery Summit?
Well, so we're a week late this month. There's a bit of an unusual SMAF. We're normally on the first Thursday of the month, but this month, for the first time ever, we're on the second Thursday, because last week all of us were deeply embroiled, or at least most of us were deeply embroiled in the Content Delivery Summit and Streaming Media East Connect, which were, by all accounts, quite popular, really. It was quite fun doing it all as a virtual event, although, to be honest, I did miss the networking parties and hanging around with my friends talking about geeky things. But of course, SMAF is the second best to that. And how are you, Tim? How did you recover from Content Delivery Summit?
Yeah, I actually recovered pretty well. Your first day was a really long day. I mean, we had a great attendance. It was 8 hours of sort of nonstop meetings. Then the next day, I did a session with Nathan and representatives from Netflix and a couple other companies around AV1. And then I had a chance to take a break, stop, write an article about algorithms and player performance, which sounds completely exciting. But no, that worked really well. Let's see, I'm going to pass on to Mark East real quick, and Brittany will come to you in just a minute, and Brian as well. So Mark, tell us, besides the babies, how has life been for you in the work world here in the last month?
I'm not getting much sleep, I will tell you that, and it's not because of the babies. It's just all sorts of stuff going on. We're busier than ever, and all of it is a little bit new. Lots of new workflows and lots of figuring out how to, enable certain technologies for virtual events and that sort of thing. We're in the process of building out a new facility in the Bay Area, and so there's just a lot on the plate. So at some point, I will learn how to function better on 3 hours of sleep a night.
And why do you have a spinning background behind you?
Oh, I thought it was appropriate. I won't give anything away, but I thought it was appropriate. I also, you haven't seen my shirt yet. Oh yeah, huh? Good stuff.
Well,
Good
Michelle's
stuff.
wearing.
I won't ask how you're growing the kids' food at the moment if you're not leaving home.
It's my hydroponic garden out in the back.
Nice. All right, with that, I'm going to introduce our two guests, and I'll start first with Brittany. So we have Brittany Brown from NASA. Brittany, tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of why you're on here today. And we're fairly informal, as Dom may have mentioned, but we're going to start with you.
Hi, everyone. Again, by way of introduction, my name is Brittany Brown, and I work at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I am here joined by my colleague, Brian Walls, and we're here to talk about NASA and our approach to streaming for one of our biggest launches, our most recent launch that happened for the agency. A little bit about myself. I've been working at NASA for a little over 2 years, and I oversee digital communications at NASA. And so our digital team includes the team who's responsible for our NASA TV channel, which is a 24/7 channel that's on broadcast as well as delivered online. In addition to NASA TV, our digital team is responsible for social media, for photo, for public inquiries, for so many things. We have a big responsibility in terms of communicating what our agency is doing and keeping the public informed about national missions and the progress of those missions.
Very nice. And I'm going to date myself, but when I worked in the aerospace research world, we used to have to pull down NASA TV off C-band and do recordings for the commander at our base near Huntsville, Alabama. So it's kind of fascinating to see how times have changed with social media and the ability to really quickly have the public get access to what you all are doing, including, as you said, the most recent launch, which is really exciting. So thank you for being a guest.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Brian, speaking of Huntsville, Alabama, I think you have Marshall Space Flight Center on your shirt. Are you actually based down in that area?
I am. I've been in Huntsville working for NASA. This will be my 35th year. So been here a little bit longer in Huntsville at Marshall Space Flight Center, and have been working in the streaming area for a good while. My title is Deputy Program Manager of the NASA Imagery Experts Program, and we coordinate imagery, the technical side of imagery from capture through distribution across the agency.
Very nice. And we're going to talk in detail. In fact, you've got a presentation here in just a couple minutes. So I have a question for you. I worked at Arnold Air Force Base, which is just north of you. And of course, we did a lot of work with NASA, Redstone, Marshall, etc. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the 35 years that you've been in?
Oh, wow. The world has changed a lot. One of the biggest to me is we used to get mail delivery twice a day, and that's where a lot of the work got done, is you go check your box 2 or 3 times a day to see if anything had shown up in those big yellow folders.
Yep.
Interagency mail. And now I can go 6 months without even checking the mailbox. I don't even have an actual mailbox anymore, and pretty much all I'm getting is some stuff from streaming media, and TV technology is all that comes.
Well, and it's fascinating, sort of the old school print magazines, because you're right. I'd forgotten about the yellow envelopes, but as soon as you said that, we used to get M2 tapes, because at that point the DoD had standardized on M2 instead of beta, so we'd have to do conversions for people. But
well, I will say that for actual high bandwidth delivery, it's still hard to beat FedExing an 8 terabyte drive.
That's true. SneakerNet. I remember when we got our first Micronet 1 gig drive, we were so happy, but then we realized the only way to get stuff down to Huntsville for work we were doing was to get in the car and drive it down there, because it was a lot faster than waiting on FedEx. So Dom, I'm going to kick it back to you real quick and just talk a little bit about why we're here today with this special event. I think a lot of it stemmed from CDS, didn't it, when we were doing some of the presentations there?
Yeah, so obviously, Brian, we've met at several different streaming media events and so on, and I know we share some strange passions for different network technologies and so on and so forth. And it's really fascinating to me to understand the sort of workflows that you oversee. I think that there's probably several angles that we could explore through the SMAF forum today. But the one that really stands out in my mind is the live streaming. The one that's always at the forefront is how do we get a live signal from a rocket launch, and how do you maintain that signal from all the different stages that you have to go through? How do you bring that to the ground, and then how do you syndicate that out? And then I'm sure we probably move more on to where Brittany's sitting, which is what do you do with that content, and how do you further syndicate that into today's social media, and what are the pressures that you're under? So sorry to be geeky, Brittany, but I really want to quiz you guys about how the cameras are installed on the rockets, and how glass to glass, how we're getting that live signal down to Earth. So I don't know which of you guys wants to take that forward, but that's what I'm burning to ask you.
Yes, Brian is the man on this. He's the expert, has some great data to share with all of us today.
Cool. Brian, shall we, you had a presentation. I don't know if that may be a good starting point, but do you want to run through?
Sure, let's start with that. And I will share. As a government worker, this is PowerPoint is a very familiar home for us. And just talking a little bit about how we do coverage of something like Demo 2. We do have a workflow that delivers both to satellite and to encoders in parallel. Of course, NASA's been doing broadcast video for decades and decades, pretty much since it's existed. And at one point, it was essentially all broadcast. And when we started doing streaming was the stepchild, but now they're kind of parallel. For this particular broadcast, it was a joint production of NASA and SpaceX, which is a new world for us. We've been doing it some with commercial crew, but when you're talking about Mercury, Apollo, the shuttle, it was always NASA's show and it was always NASA's rocket. But we're moving into a world where the rockets are commercially provided, and we're essentially buying a service. So it's spacecraft as a service, and there's a close working relationship. But clearly, SpaceX has an interest in sharing what they're doing. NASA has part of our charter is sharing what we're doing, and so in this case, the production was done by both teams working closely together. And when we were streaming, each of us did our own stream. So we were sharing the content, we shared that output. And SpaceX did theirs the way they do their launches. We did ours the way we do our coverage. And if you're looking at one or the other on the network, you're seeing the same show, but the NASA one's going to have a meatball up in the corner saying NASA. And in the show that we actually did, so for the Demo 2, you wouldn't have seen exactly the same thing if you were watching SpaceX, because NASA went from our main feed, covered when President Trump spoke. We broke for a press conference. But just a little background on what we do day to day. NASA has NASA television, and we actually have 3 channels that we send to satellite. One of them is called NASA TV Public Education, and it's the one that's mostly aimed at the public. One is NASA TV Media, which is obviously we're trying to put out feeds that are of interest to media outlets. And then the third is the NASA TV UHD channel. And right now it is a collection of really pretty UHD content that is just playing out on a loop. And we have the content that's on that available for on demand. And there's a Roku app that simulates live linear. We aren't currently doing a live linear channel there. But the 2 HD channels we stream, and they're streaming 24/7 all the time. And so for Demo 2, we were using both of those channels. And on media, we were putting out things, less commentary, no lower thirds for most of it, that sort of thing. Sometimes they were simulcast. and sometimes they were covering what was going on in the capsule while the public channel was covering a space press conference or whatever else. It was a long event. It was over 9 hours of live content with commentary, that sort of thing. And then the live part went on all night and into the next day until they were safely docked and had gotten on board. And all of this was happening while NASA is in stage 3 or stage 4 COVID-19 lockdown, which essentially means everybody's supposed to be working from home unless there's something mission critical. And it's always, so that was an additional challenge, scale back some of the things we might have done otherwise. So for the broadcast, through the launch, the shows were switched from the Cape, and I have a diagram showing some of what was going on at JSC, but of course there are also, or at KSC and at the Cape, but there were also feeds coming from Houston and from the SpaceX Control Center in Hawthorne, California. And then after the launch, they switched over to the content was coming out of JSC and Hawthorne. And the rest of the points that I have there, I'll talk about a little more. This is a picture of just the layout that we had for what was going on at KSC. I'm not going to try to delve into this a whole lot, but just to say that there's a lot going on. There were a lot of inputs. There was content coming in over bonded cellular, over fiber, over coax, remote cameras, and most folks probably don't realize it, but the Air Force runs a lot of the Cape facilities, and there's a separate NASA part, plus SpaceX has their own buildings. All of that was working together to feed in to the one show, getting into the main router. And then besides this, well, you can see down in the lower corner, it shows an encoder going to NASA television. And we also had streams coming in from JSC and Hawthorne. This is showing just, so there are direct connected lines moving video back and forth between JSC and Hawthorne and KSC and Hawthorne, so that we had a back feed. Those are used for both mission purposes as well as for being able to do a show like this. And then besides that, NASA has what we call our multicast digital TV VLAN that connects to all of our centers, and it also connects to Encompass, who is our satellite provider. And so from Encompass, so talking about how do we get it out, we go to satellite, and from satellite, the NASA TV signal is free for anybody to pick up. And what I was showing with the blue lines here, those are feeding to, those are people that take our channel and redistribute it. So Dish, DirecTV, Google Fiber, and Xfinity, all at least in some markets, take NASA TV and have it on 24/7. Some of the other ones, we send 24/7 streams out directly to YouTube, to IBM Cloud, to Akamai, which we embed in our pages and using the NASA app. Pluto TV also gets one. We send to the Teradek core a stream from Encompass, and then with the Teradek core, that allows our PAO folks to go in and create secondary streams out to all kinds of different social. So this is some of the social media that we were going to during the event. And the ones that aren't tagged with anything, we don't always know who all is picking up our content and using it for, especially for an event like this. And if somebody does want to stream and is going to be redistributing it, they can get in touch with us and say, hey, we're doing this. Can you send it to our Facebook page? And so that's a capability that we have as well. And then I'll hand it over to Brittany to talk a bit about where it went and who was watching.
Yes, thanks so much, Brian, for setting that up. So since our founding in 1958, one of NASA's mandates is public dissemination of information. So trying to reach the largest audience possible. And this Demo 2 mission, the first time SpaceX sent astronauts to space, was definitely an opportunity for us to do that. As Brian mentioned, we use Encompass to push out feeds via Teradek to a variety of social media platforms. And you'll see here just some of the numbers that we have, and I have some more numbers that I can share with you. But at peak on launch day, we had more than 10.6 million concurrent viewers watching both the NASA and SpaceX streams. As Brian mentioned, this was really big for us in that both NASA and SpaceX were essentially streaming, for the most part, the same broadcast. It has been the case for previous SpaceX launches, cargo launches in particular, since it's the first time sending astronauts to space, that they've had, before a SpaceX stream that was a little different than NASA. And we've seen comments online of like, hey, SpaceX, their cameras are better, or their feed looks better, I'm gonna watch over there. But this was a great opportunity for us to team up with SpaceX on this broadcast, to have a single place to point people to, but then also to have various points of entry. So we were streaming to the flagship at NASA Twitter account, and our Facebook account, and our YouTube account, and our Twitch account, our LinkedIn account. But beyond that, we realized, again, thinking of that mandate, reaching the largest audience possible, while we have millions of people who are following NASA on social media, millions of people who are following SpaceX on social media, there's value in having some surrogates and some brand ambassadors out there streaming this too. Brian mentioned that, sometimes folks will reach out to us and say, hey, you have this big event, we want to stream. You will give you the stream keys and the RTMP so you can put in Teradek so that we can stream to our pages. And that definitely did happen. I'll give you some examples of some of the organizations that work with us on this. We had the United States Marine Corps. They were interested in streaming. And I used to work for the Army, so I definitely have affinity for the Department of Defense and military service branches. So Doug Hurley, one of the astronauts who actually went to space, he is a retired Marine colonel. And so the Marine Corps was interested in either sharing our broadcast or having it pushed to their channel. I also had someone from the digital communications team at Discovery reach out and say, hey, we want to stream this. One of my colleagues also worked with Nat Geo. And so again, this is just a snapshot of some other places where this stream and conversation was taking place online. I have some numbers that I can share with you in addition to what Brian shared. We had a very popular event back in 2017 with the eclipse. And so for this particular event, we were thinking we'll never have, that many viewers watching this. We'll never top those numbers. But it actually was the case that when you combine the viewership just on YouTube alone for both the SpaceX account and the flagship NASA account, we had more than 56 million total viewers tuned in for this. And our channel, weeks after the launch, is still continuing to see a remarkable surge in viewers. To date, we've received up to 18 million views just on the NASA stream, and people are continuing to watch it. One of the tactics that has changed for us recently in the past year, for our streaming on YouTube in particular, being one of the largest search engines, is that, Brian mentioned we have our NASA TV channels. We have 24/7 programming. Those programming, that channel is available on our YouTube channel. So you can visit NASA, youtube.com/NASA and look at our 24/7 TV programming at any point. But what we learned from our YouTube partners as a best practice is that we should schedule individual broadcasts on YouTube so that people can set a reminder to come back to watch, and so that that particular broadcast and event is its own video and people can watch it on demand versus coming to a stream that is available 24/7. You don't know what time it started. You have to do, rewind or fast forward to find the actual moment that you want to see. And so having that tactic of being able to schedule this on YouTube, again, has paid off so many dividends for us. One of the data points that I saw, and I pulled this morning, as of this week, we've received 90.5 million views, and this is 20 times as many as we picked up over the previous 7-day period. And right now, we own the 23rd most popular YouTube destination in the United States, and SpaceX is following and trailing behind us in the 29th place. So again, we had specific strategies as it relates to streaming online. And while we have a small but mighty team, we saw the value in, if we're streaming to all of these platforms, it's more than just connecting it to Teradek and pushing a stream there. I made sure that in terms of staffing, that I had an individual person dedicated to each platform. So one of my colleagues, I said, okay, you're going to be manning YouTube, meaning that the entire time we're broadcasting, you're in the comments, you're engaging, you're responding to folks. We have some questions teed up from subject matter experts so that you can answer the questions that we anticipate that we get. We had a similar colleague who was involved in Twitch. This was by far our largest and most popular broadcast that we had on Twitch. It peaked at nearly 400,000 simultaneous viewers, and the recording itself had almost 100,000 plays. Beyond people watching it, and I can share lots and lots of data of how many people watched it. What's great about this event is that it's enduring. People decided to follow NASA. This was an opportunity for them to connect with NASA, to connect with this mission, to be inspired by human spaceflight and what we're doing, and say, hey, I don't just want to watch this, but I want to sign up and subscribe to get even more content. As an example, on Twitch, our account added 481,000 new followers. On Facebook, we also added new followers, and this continues for all of our platforms that we streamed on. We use this as an opportunity to find new platforms to also stream on as well. So Daily Motion, we stood up a Daily Motion account and streamed to that platform to build an audience there. We connected with other platforms that people may be on, such as Theta TV, to say, hey, our content is free, just like Brian mentioned. If people want to share it, or if people are interested, let's give them an opportunity to share this content if they want it. And so we're really excited about all of the interest in this, all of the great numbers, all of the great engagement. But more importantly, it's important for us to continue to sustain that momentum, sustain that interest throughout this mission, as we have some really other exciting launches coming up. A perfect example of that is we're launching a rover to Mars in mid to late July. And so a lot of the lessons learned about how we stream with this, all the different camera views that we had, we're going to replicate that and share those best practices across the board, across the agency, to make sure that we're using this as a best case scenario and using those lessons learned to move us forward.
There's some amazing numbers in there. That was a succinct and some of that was astounding. First thing off the top of my head, why do you think Twitch was so popular?
Twitch was really popular because my colleague who I had managed that, he actually is very invested in Twitch. And so he knows the community. He actually reached out to Twitch, and what's so great, I can go into so many details about all the different platforms and how we reached out to them. But Twitch was really popular because, again, the colleague who helped manage that platform, he reached out to Twitch. And although we're a government agency and we cannot pay for any paid promotion or anything like that, the folks at Twitch saw the value and the importance of this mission, and they featured it on their homepage. They did that for us because they knew that there was going to be so much interest. And again, returning human spaceflight to the United States for the first time since 2011, the first time that SpaceX has sent up astronauts beyond their other missions, which are essentially cargo missions to the space station. In addition to having that front page placement on Twitch, we also had my colleague who was managing Twitch reach out to some folks who broadcast on Twitch and say, hey, let's co-host and let's have you jump in our conversations. Let's bring your traffic to our channels. And so again, we were leveraging the importance of influencers and other platforms, that widest dissemination as possible, realizing, okay, we have a certain audience who's already follow NASA on Twitch, but how do we bring in other communities? How do we get really popular broadcasters on Twitch to be interested in that? And a lot of it was like just heavy lifting of like, let's see what channels are out there and people that are interested in space or interested in science. Let's send them a message and see, hey, do you want to co-host with us? Do you want to take an hour or two and just be in our chat, or and working through that? And we did that for multiple platforms, but that for sure definitely helped out with Twitch and some of those Twitch numbers.
Are you monetizing like that? Are you, or is it something that's a sunk cost for NASA just to produce and give away?
I'm sorry. Do you mind repeating that?
Monetizing? Are you putting like ad monetization into this, taking ad monetization revenue through YouTube and through Twitch and so on, or are you? Is it all free to air, loss led, and you're not expecting to build a commercial revenue from it for NASA?
Yes, so we don't do any type of advertising. We actually, by law, cannot use appropriated government funds for any type of additional promotion as it relates to social media. We're barred from doing that. There are a couple of exceptions in terms of recruitment. So as an example, on platforms like LinkedIn, we can have recruitment campaigns, but for the most part, in terms of monetization, that's not something in an area in a space that we really can play in as a government agency.
So not only can we not advertise, we also can't use advertising to raise funds, because by law, funding for NASA has to be appropriated by Congress. That's their job. And so if an organization could potentially earn its own keep, unless Congress set that up and said to do it, it's not legal.
And half a million concurrent is some significant traffic. And actually, what was making me curious was how YouTube can sustain maintaining that level of traffic on your behalf. It was, or Amazon or Twitch or whoever it may be. But yeah, just interesting in the economics of the content delivery there.
And I want to add, having worked in public affairs, I'm very impressed with your going out and proactively finding influencers on platforms like Twitch, because I think that's key. This is content, Dom's in the UK, and I'd say my hat's off to you, but Dom wears the hat. So Dom's in the UK, and he's as interested in this as we are here in the States. And it seems like it's the kind of content when you come to somebody, Brittany, and say, we're going to give it to you for free, and we want you to help us promote it. We can't pay you to promote it, and obviously we can't make any money off of it. It seems like what you're saying is that people jump at that opportunity to be part of something like this.
Absolutely. And that was actually one of the tenets of this broadcast, of making this broadcast overall interactive. This broadcast, it was marrying, those worlds, the traditional broadcast with this online audience, this online experience. And as you were watching, you saw that you had our commentators mentioning Twitter posts. Go to NASA on Twitter and answer whether you like the meatball or the logo, the meatball or the worm logo. For some of these content creators and influencers, some of the things that we asked them to do is like host a watch party, share content using our hashtag Launch America, and it might be featured in the broadcast. Of course, we can't guarantee anything, but for some of them, they saw something that was in it for them, of like, okay, this is content that's new, that's exclusive, that's fresh, it's a different perspective that I can share with my audiences. For some of them, inviting them in, just the weight of, we have a big, impressive brand, NASA reaching out to people, just sending them a direct message. People were blown away, like, what? NASA knows I exist. And so we're very fortunate in that, years, and again, this isn't my work, but years and years of the NASA brand and history of what the agency has done, that some folks really take that to heart, getting a message from NASA, and they're like, hey, what can I do? How can I spread the word? Knowing that, we can't pay them. It's literally, we may make an ask of folks, hey, do you want to share it? Do you need some content? Let us know. We'll give it to you. All of our stuff is in the public domain. And then it's really up to them if they feel inspired to share it. It's no pressure, but we want to give those opportunities. And we've built over time a database of influencers that we reach out to. We kind of have broken it down by different silos of like, these are STEM related influencers. These are folks, and media outlets that maybe we should reach out to. So for any upcoming event, we realize the power of having those brand ambassadors, of having those advocates. And it's a lot of work reaching out to them and sending them direct messages. Again, we don't want to send them, it's like the equivalent of getting an email where it's like everyone's just BCC to blast email, but we send them tailored messages of like, hey, here's an opportunity for you. Here's what we can provide you, whether it's early access to our Instagram filter or whatever. But it's a lot of work. But as you can tell with the numbers, some of the numbers I've shared, it's worth the work in the end.
And do some of those influencers want to share their stories with you about NASA? I mean, I've worked in part of the program, so to me, I've got stories. But when you reach out to an influencer and they suddenly realize NASA knows they exist, do they then want to share back to you like, hey, I remember watching this launch, or I remember doing this as a kid?
Absolutely. There's one story I can remember. There's someone, we were looking on YouTube of music, and there was a song that someone created that was inspired by space, and we used it for one of our promo teaser videos for the launch. So we sent our message like, hey, we love this song. Can we possibly use a snippet of your YouTube video in one of our YouTube videos? And as soon as it went live, I guess a couple weeks later, she was so excited, and the media picked up on it, and then it kind of went viral of like, hey, this was noticed by NASA, and it became a thing. But we love those moments because, again, we were trying to create a piece of content to get people hooked into it, but then she turned that into another story, and so it kept snowballing into even more. And her building up her fan base now that people know her because of NASA, but again, it was NASA who noticed her first. So it's really great seeing those things kind of happen organically.
Nice. Hey, Mark, there were a bunch of encoders on that one slide Brian shared. What's your take on that?
Actually captured the slide so I could refer to it later, but looks like they're mostly contribution encoders that were being used there, correct? What besides the Teradek platform is being used for live streaming?
So
Anything?
the streams that are going out from Encompass to YouTube Live to IBM and to Akamai, they have elemental encoders. They have a bank of elemental encoders that we use. The Teradek, we're using a Teradek encoder to go to it. So those are the two encoders that we're essentially using to go out to the world.
Got it. One of the newer generation, like cubes, or
I'm not sure what they're using.
Okay.
It is a fairly new one, I believe.
Gotcha. Do you have
being able to go to UHD streaming?
Got it. Was that maybe the key, decision maker in going with the core platform? We do a lot of work with Teradek, so I'm always curious to know why people, land on that platform.
So we went. It was the other way. Using the Teradek core pushed us to the Teradek encoder there, because at least when we were first rolling it out, the elemental wasn't talking using SRT.
Mm-hmm.
Was the connection, and the elemental was at least the configuration of the elementals that they had there weren't capable of doing that at the time. So, and the benefit, well, we were starting to use the Teradek core because we had been using some of their cellular bonding equipment, and the ability to easily go in and set up sharing to all the different social things was the benefit that pushed us toward that. Because of course you can do that from the elemental, but we didn't have access to that interface because we're buying the encoding as a service. So for the social media team to be able to sit down, log in, and either have things set up ahead of time or to very quickly set up a Twitch or Twitter or Facebook, either to our own accounts or to somebody else's, was a key benefit.
Gotcha.
Are you getting the same input feed to your encoders across the board? Is there a sort of sense of, here's the broadcast standard to which we aggregate all camera feeds and all video sources across the platform, and then we transcode from that standard into our streaming formats? Or are you does it look like on that slide? Are you dealing with many hundreds of different formats to get them into some sort of conformity before you transcode them? And also, what the second part of that question is, what do you transcode to? Is it just do you have any standards in terms of long-term archival and so on?
So one of the most important things the NASA Imagery Experts program did when it was getting started, that group's origin was really in our transition from an analog broadcast format to digital. And one of the big things that it did at the very outset was to get everybody together and decide what our broadcast standard was going to be. And we went with 720p 60, and that's still what we're using today for HD. And so at our core, we're still, what we create is done from a broadcast point of view. And everything that's going to NASA TV is going to an encoder that our group manages. So each different center may have its own equipment for capture, and most people are capturing now in at least 4K or more. If they're doing live content, what they send to us is SDI into our broadcast encoder that goes to that multicast network I showed, and it's going to be 720p 60. And from there, we go out. So if we're doing something like this show, certainly we're going out from the Encompass facility, and that's where the encoders are. Sometimes we do that for other things. Centers do have their own encoders if we're doing a show that is purely intended for the web, which isn't all that unusual. Then there's a mixture of different things. But typically we're going out at 720p following that same format. But whatever you're using, it's kind of between you and your endpoint on what they want. So whether that's RTMP or SRT or.
And do you archive all that 720p raw video? And is that the sort of mezzanine layer that you archive, or is there do you have sort of, here's some input formats and we'll store all of those separately, and here's all the composited programs that we streamed in MP4 and they're archived? How's that end up? You must have a storage problem basically, because you've got a lot of good content being generated.
Well, we do, and we're working on a more uniform solution for that right now, because each center and each program is responsible for archiving content, and we are moving toward having a central, or at least having a specification and having a shared content management system that is available between all the centers. That doesn't exist yet.
Awesome. Dom, I think you had a question. I can sense that.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in sort of a technical concept, which is, have you actually ever put encoders into any of the orbiting machinery and into any of the ISS or into any of the spacecraft, and then used, presumably there's IP connectivity between ground and space. So I wondered whether you'd ever done any video using IP, the benefits of IP and the compression that comes with IP to deliver any point-to-point streams from space directly to ground. Does it sound, the workflow, it looks like it's largely broadcast quality, and after the, and then it's grounded and then it's transcoded into a streaming format?
So I do not know the details of what SpaceX has done in their craft. So for this one particularly, I don't know the details, but I can talk quite a bit to the International Space Station. And the way we do the video from there, since it went digital, has been H.264. It is a transport stream. So really it looks very much like an IPTV type multicast stream. For SD video, it was built into the onboard system, but when we went to HD, we actually flew some separate, their advanced technology cards that are just encoder cards that does an H.264 AAC, and we're doing them at about 8 meg, which is fairly high, but we currently have about a 600 megabit per second downlink available from ISS. It kind of comes and goes depending on how it's talking to the TDRS satellite system. But from the point of view of the card itself, it's just streaming to the onboard IP network. And from there, it gets wrapped up in CD, CD consultative, I'm not even thinking of it.
Just use the acronym.
Data system, CCSDS is the format, which wraps up the IP, sends it down, and it gets unwrapped there. So
be quite latency tolerant.
It is fairly well, and the latency typically isn't all that bad.
It's half a second, isn't it? So it must be 320 millisecond or something, I guess.
Right. And then when it comes down, it's just looking very much, it's a standard broadcast transport stream that is either there or isn't there, which causes some problems because every time you change satellite or whatever, it drops out and comes back. But there are 6 of those that are running all the time, either SD or HD, but it's a total of 6, and we're currently working on possibly going to 12. And then individual payloads can be doing their own thing besides that, and it's typically using IP. So some of them are doing transport streams, and then there's some that are doing RTP type streaming.
And is that
H.265 as well?
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, is that number of paths for redundancy, or is it because they're all taking individual feeds from different cameras on the ISS?
6 individual feeds from all of the available sources. And there's probably a bit more than a dozen different sources. There are cameras in each of the nodes. There are cameras embedded in some of the payloads, and then there are external cameras. And so there are several external HD cameras as well as the SD ones that have been there all along. Those are still analog cameras that are being converted with PTZs, and we strap the HD cameras onto those, and there are, the HD cameras are essentially SLR type camera bodies, electronics that can either do stills or do the video.
Gotcha. Any 4K imagery being captured yet, or has that not gone up?
So we have Red camera, Red cinema camera on board. There have been a couple of other 4K cameras, but right now we have an 8K Red, I believe, but that it captures and downloads the file. We did a demonstration actually at NAB a couple of years ago. We did a demo of live stream down from station using the Red, so it was doing a UHD stream, but we don't have anything production currently.
Gotcha, understood. Coming up on the end of the hour here, Dom, I have many nerdy questions. May I?
Actually, we might have to go into a rapid fire one because we've actually had questions coming in from the floor, and I want to ask just a quick cheeky one. Brian, does anyone in the ISS, I'm thinking about in-flight entertainment, does anyone on the ISS allow them to use the IP link up there to watch Netflix or whatever it may be?
I don't think anybody's watching Netflix, but they do have the ability, they can request movies, and they do upload digital movies that they can watch there.
Near video on demand up there, is it?
So Dom, are you saying you want to share your account password with somebody on the ISS just to see if they can watch Netflix?
I want to know what stage we're at in space, whether it's video on demand or near video on demand or scheduled video on demand only. So anyway.
So they do video chat. They can do, live video to their families and that sort of thing. But for entertainment purposes, it's store and forward type thing.
Excellent. So we've got a question on the chat room as well. So Euclid's asking here, when NASA, he was interested in why he tried to watch on NASA and on the SpaceX stream, and he went for SpaceX because the NASA stream was 30 seconds behind. And he's wondering how. My guess is that was an HLS thing. 30 seconds sort of stands out, but.
So we're certainly doing HLS, but I think SpaceX is too. So I'm surprised there was that much different.
It probably depends on.
I wasn't seeing that much of a difference.
So you assumed, Don, that he was talking about the embedded streams in the two websites and not social?
I guess so. I think my guess is it's going to be something's got right on the front of a GOP and something's got right behind three GOPs and needs to decache and probably start again and he'd be on time. But, and there was a second part to that question before we go to your rapid fires, Mark, which was the NASA stream was 720p 60 and the SpaceX stream was just 720p. Was there a reason?
Well, 720p 60 is our broadcast standard. I'm not guaranteeing that the stream that you got was necessarily 60. All the frames is certainly something you drop quickly to get the bandwidth down. We may be doing 30 on our streams as well, but that's a different choice.
Go on, Mark, go down your bullet list. I'm sure you've got loads of ones. It's a rapid fire session. Go.
Okay, so you mentioned outages. You mentioned the satellite network that the ISS communicates with. Are there significant outages that are, hours at a time, and you have to kind of schedule around that for these special events that happen on the station?
No, they are. So the space station goes around the Earth 90 minutes per orbit, and there are TDRS satellites are in geosynchronous orbit. So every 90 minutes, it's having to change satellites 2 to 3 times. And when they're re-steering, there's a short amount. So it's usually 30 to 40 seconds. But depending upon the orbit and the shape of the orbit and where the satellites are, we do sometimes get 5 to 6 minutes outages, but that's about as long as you go. But yes, they very meticulously and carefully map all those out and know when they're going to happen, and it makes a difference on when they schedule, like downlinks and press. They do quite a bit talking to schools and talking to reporters, and that's all taken into account.
Gotcha, understood. So when you mentioned working together with SpaceX, how and kind of judging by your diagram, it looks like most of the production, most of the cameras that we were seeing, most of the sources were all NASA, and that the only thing coming from SpaceX was really the cameras coming from Hawthorne. Is that the case, or were there cameras provided for the Dragon coming from SpaceX and that sort of thing?
Yeah, a lot of it was from SpaceX. Brittany may want to talk a little more about that, but even that diagram that I had, so SpaceX is leasing the pad that they launched from, as well as several buildings there, and the pad where they're landing their first stages, where they put together all the things and get them ready to launch, integrate their payload. That's all their stuff. So all of the trackers were provided by SpaceX, and the video was going to them before it came to us, at least most of the trackers. A lot of those remote cameras that are on the pad were theirs. And of course, they were also bringing in the video from the Dragon itself. So a lot of cameras from both sides.
Gotcha. And who, in terms of where the cameras are placed and how they're used in the show and what we see over the course of that pool feed, who is making those decisions? Is it someone at NASA who's actually directing the show, or do you bring in outside parties to do large events like this?
Definitely let Brittany answer that one.
Sure, most definitely. We actually had someone from the NASA team who was producing the show. Again, this was in tandem with SpaceX, so all of those decisions we made recommendations, made sure that SpaceX was okay with it, and then we moved forward with it. But the show was produced by someone who works with our administrator, creative director. His name is Paul Wizakowski. So he led the charge for this event, and we'll be doing the same for upcoming events, including the Mars Perseverance rover launch that I mentioned that's happening in July.
Wonderful. Can't wait.
Perfect. I've just got one last question coming that's popped in on the chat room, which I think is for Brittany. Is there going to be video on the ISS's Instagram feed? And also, what do you use for the photos?
Video on the feeds, that's, we typically upload videos sometime there, but we have not really gone live on Instagram in particular, just because a lot of our streaming, as I mentioned earlier, is done via Teradek. So unfortunately, we cannot connect Instagram Live to Teradek to make that happen. But we're looking forward to more video opportunities. We've been experimenting with going live on NASA's Instagram. A lot of those lives, as an example, we had a Q&A with the two astronauts, Bob and Doug, and they just got on our Instagram Live. We gave them the password, and they just kind of had a free-flowing conversation, asking questions back and forth. The imagery that's shared on the ISS Instagram account, a majority of which is taken by the astronauts. They'll either take the photos and send them back down to the team here at Houston and the astronaut office, and they'll post on their behalf. But again, we don't necessarily give them parameters of, we want you to take photos of this. Kind of, up to them when they have free time, if they're in a cupola and they find an opportunity. There are a couple outliers where we may, let's say in the case of a hurricane or something like that, hey, we'd love to have photos of this world event that's taking place. But for the most part, they have the autonomy to capture whatever photography and videography that they like to do on the space station. And so we love getting that from them and sharing on our social media accounts.
Perfect. Now, Mark's asking why no one's asked about his background. Go on, Mark. What's your background?
I was going to ask about that at the end.
That's 10-year-old me at the Huntsville Space and Rocket Center. And if you'll look really closely, that hat says honorary astronaut. The director of the Space and Rocket Center presented me with that hat, and I was very special for at least a couple hours.
I love it. That's amazing.
As I said, we all have our stories, apparently. So, Mark, did you get to go to space camp, or you just went for a
Oh man, I wanted nothing more when I was a little kid, but I was a little early. I think space camp started when I was like 14 or 15, so I missed the boat a little bit on it. But yeah, I was on tour at the time, and we did a little VIP tour of the Space and Rocket Center, and one of my formative experiences. It was great.
Nice. Well, I want to thank both Brittany and Brian for being here today. Brittany, thank you very much for giving the perspective on sort of what happens once the content goes out to social media. It's really very good information.
Thanks for having me, and thanks so much for Brian for leading the conversation and putting together the slides. It's been great.
And Brian, as Dom said, you've been around us in the streaming industry long enough to feel like one of the honorary founders of streaming, if not an honorary astronaut. We really thank you for your time, and especially for laying out on the slides exactly what it is that we're doing here from the U.S. perspective to get that kind of content out there as we do these historic launches.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. It was good to talk.
Dom, with that, I think we'll give it to you to wrap us up.
Okay, so yeah, we'll be back on, as usual, back on our normal flow on the first Thursday of next month. Sign up for an email reminder. If you find one of our links on the site saying email me a reminder, we'll make sure we let you know what's coming up each month as the months go round. But that was a bit of a special SMAFtacular. Eric sends his apologies for not being here, got tied up with something. But it's always good to have these informal chats about geeky topics. It always ends my week well. So those of you that fancy a bit of a late night boogie, we're going to be putting the radio show on shortly on the Thursday night show. I've got to plug that because that makes it fun. So tune into that if you fancy something slightly different. Apologies for the slight glitch for those watching on YouTube. We lost about 30 seconds in the middle, and I'm not going to brandish them with a name by slating which piece of technology crashed, but a piece of technology crashed, and that's just the nature of trying to do webcasts about webcasting. Something will always go wrong. So with no further ado, and before everything else crashes, I'm going to end this month's SMAF, but I'll see you next month. Thanks all.